be very brief. I will use a concept popularly known as miniskirt. Long enough to cover the subject matter and short enough to elicit the necessary interest. For me, I'll be talking about something which Mwema gave me deliberately because it's not very interesting to scientists. And for me, I'm an epidemiologist, but later on I started transiting to issues to do with policy. Scientists are very keen on concepts of epidemiological concepts. But when it comes to the next question, they start not getting very interested. I know you have learned a lot of concepts, right? Which one is the most interesting so far? Huh? Odds ratio. Huh? They have learned a lot of things, odds ratio, study designs. I hear somebody saying even predictive value positive. But for us in policy, we ask you, so what? That's why we are not very popular. And that's why I have not really migrated entirely to policy. I stay between policy and the complicated predictive value positives and so on and so forth. So I'll be trying to attempt to do the use of epidemiological data for informed policy decision. If you look at that title, we are having an issue to do with epidemiological data. And I know up to this point we have been introduced properly to epidemiology. I know we have a multi-sectoral team here. I know we have vets, we have medics, we have public health specialists. Who else do we have? Statisticians. I can see GIS experts. Yeah? Who else do we have? So in short, we are a cocktail. So there's some people whom we are introducing to epidemiology, for the first time. So what have we agreed epidemiology is while we were away? At Isha. So we have agreed something. And by the way, these issues to do with policies where the Constitution talks about public participation. So we have to talk. This one can only be a conversation. It cannot be a lecture. So what have you guys agreed that is epidemiology? Just say it. Study of disease patterns. Sit down. What else? Distribution. What else? Determinants. Sit down. Good. Then the other thing I would want to ask you, what do you think policy is? What do you think policy is? Great. I can hear people saying something. So for me, I'll take you through this, and I will want to just remind you what you guys have been mentioned. It has been mentioned to you already, so that we bring the data to context. What is this epidemiology we are talking about? What is the epidemiological data? Just an overview, because we can't really do much in terms of delving deeper. What is the policy? What are the types of policy that we have? And some of the examples of case studies that we have in Kenya where epidemiological data have resulted in policy or a policy decision. And then we ask ourselves as scientists that we are, what is the approach we can use to making a policy decision using epidata? And then we will very quickly go through an overview of the policy process. And of course, because it is very important that we do two policy tools called policy brief and a cabinet memo, just to mention so that we have an idea what it is. The time we have here, of course, we cannot go to details of training and teaching you what is a policy brief and a cabinet memo, but I want us to have a rough idea because we are scientists and we have a a duty to not only do research, but do research for action and do research that addresses certain pertinent issues that in the society today. Si hapo ni ukweli? So we start by asking ourselves what is epidemiology, and I could hear you murmuring these things that we are talking about, and we have said it is just a study of distribution, determinants, patterns of health-related events. Remember, we are not talking about diseases. Sidio? We are talking about health-related events because a disease could be, an event could be the disease, or a public health event could be something else, which is not necessarily a disease. For instance, what else do you think could be a health event instead of a disease? Yes? Sorry? Yes, deaths, massive deaths of animals, massive deaths of people, floods. They affect people's welfare, livelihoods, and all over. What else? Yeah? Sha. Sha, I reserve my comments. Because I was not here when you were introducing yourself, so that I know whether there is NIS in here. So remember the key words here is the distribution, okay? And then we have another key word here, which is the determinants, and that is what the gist of the presentation I just found you having. I was very interested. The determinants. What did you call them? When now you're coming to data. These determinants of a disease, what did you call them in those good terminologies? Epidemiological. Huh? I heard you talking about response and whatever and predictor. See, don't? Yeah, so the predictors are what we are talking about here. And they're also called risk factors. See, don't? What are these risk factors? And what is the pattern looking like? And then we can be able to ask ourselves, whether we actually, what is the distribution like? It seeks to understand how diseases spread and what factors influence their occurrence and the impact they have on public health. So it is very important for us to then understand that, so that then we can be able to ask ourselves, having understood epidemiology, what does epidemiological data include? I know most of you are dealing with the data. Sit down. Yeah? Yes. All those specialists who are here, at one time or the other, I'm sure you have dealt with data. And when we talk about epidemiological data, again, it's information about distribution. Remember distribution, determinant, and control of diseases in human, animal, and environmental health. So we do not want to limit ourselves to the health events, okay? The data on health events. Because we have understood that health events are not only caused by diseases. They are much broader than diseases. And that is why we bring in a bigger spectrum when it comes to data. And we talk of, on top of our minds, we know there is the US through the human health surveillance data and animal health surveillance data. And we have always, sometimes in the government, forgotten to incorporate in our basic analysis, environmental or climatic data, then AMR or antimicrobial use surveillance data, then issues to do with food safety data, and any other information on the drivers of public health events. Some of the things like food safety data, what kind of data do you think you're talking about? People who are concerned with food safety, what kind of data do they generate? Yes. Yeah, drug residues, even some of the patterns that we are seeing, so that we can be able to associate it with some kind of behavior or some kind of practices, okay? I like the way this is coming, because then it forms the basis for us to ask ourselves. For instance, if we realize there's some drug residue in the milk coming from a certain part of this country, we might want to ask the next question: what could be happening in that area? That the only milk with drug residues is coming from a certain area. And then we dig deeper. And that is where now the design of the studies that you've been talking about comes in. Ask yourself, which kind of samples can answer my question so that I know what is happening in these areas? Which milk is going to be treated like the case? And which one is going to be treated like the control, and so on and so forth? How much sample do I require? Then you go on and make that conclusion, and you come up with some good conclusion that then can take us to our next conversation about what do we do next. You have done very sophisticated studies, so what? The drug residues are in the milk. People are consuming the drug residues, and it is causing health concerns. So what do we do to stop the health concern from being transmitted from the milk to the people? That is where we come in. There, so what? So just to explain to you the reason why we are talking about all that spectrum, the World Organization for Animal Health, if you look at that, it should not worry you. Where we are talking of the pre-emergence is where they are really, or even the tripartite, which includes also the World Health Organization, FAO, and those international bodies. They are really emphasizing on deep prevention. Deep prevention meaning you who are in health sector, human health sector, should not wait for cases and tell us now, I have detected the index case, and therefore only one person have died from that case and we have arrested the outbreak. That is a failed system. Do you agree? Because it is possible that that case did not come from human beings. It came from the environment where you could have actually detected in the air. Probably, it moved from the environment, went to the wild animals, came to livestock, then came to human beings, then settled in somebody's body until it finished the course of a disease development, and it killed. It caused a mortality. So can you now claim that you have an early detection? So that means the environmental indicators failed to tell us that there's a problem. The wildlife indicators failed to tell us that there is a problem. The livestock indicators also failed. And now you are claiming that you have done, or you have an early warning system in place. So the deep prevention just emphasizes on us being able to detect and identify which are these drivers that are coming quite early before the human is infected. And which is this data that we can use to actually be able to detect them. Okay? And that is where the gist of One Health really matters. Because we have been saying it for so long, but we have limited ourselves to human data and animal data. And in fact, we are more energized to respond when it is human affected. So that is why we are saying, just to show you that we need then to have a system that is able to take that. So if an animal is affected, again, that is a bit late. If it's a domestic animal, so if it is, we expect that it's going to be detected by the animal health surveillance system early enough. And alerts raised to the subsequent areas we expect the disease to progress to. If not detected, of course, it will progress, and of course, with the possibility of becoming a pandemic. So that was just to emphasize on that. So what is our understanding of policy? Having understood where we are coming from with epidemiology and epidemiological data, who can tell me what they understand in their layman understanding of policy? Is there anybody who understands it in a simpler way? In a simple, straightforward way? It's not me who said that we should have stakeholder consultation. Eh? It is not me, it's the Constitution. Yes? Yes. The outcomes of? Mm-hmm. Yeah. to make a certain decision, right? Yeah, that's good. What else do you have in mind when you think about policy? Yes. Correct. It's supposed to guide certain practices or even way of life, shape our way of life. I saw your hand up. Uh-huh. Research findings and their effects on the population. Great. So a policy is a deliberate set of principles, yeah, or rules or guidelines that are established by an institution, organization, or government to guide decision making and achieve specific desired outcome. Okay? So, what is the policy of this workshop? What is the reporting time? 8:30, studio. So as simple as that sounds, it's a policy for this particular workshop, studio. There are certain other things that are supposed to shape the way we behave when we're in here, which are our simple and a low-level form of a policy. Sometimes we think policy must be passed by the parliament for it to be called a policy. Others think that it must have a presidential assent for it to be called a policy, but it is not necessarily has to go to that level because different policies have different levels, okay? And they also operate at different levels. So whatever guiding principles you have, whatever whatever set of guidelines or principles you have, that becomes our policy. They serve as a framework for consistent and informed action in addressing issues, allocating resources, or solving problems within a given context. In our case here, the context is public health. So we are saying they help us and give us a framework where we can be consistent. So if we say we are going to run our surveillance system like this, they help us to be consistent. The reason why we need to be consistent is because we have 47 counties and we need consistent approach to that particular thing. That makes sense, right? So that then when you bring together this information, which has been collected in a consistent manner, and you analyze, those biases you spoke about, those errors that are likely to arise when you analyze your data, we minimize them. Sidio? Great. So, the other thing is, the other keyword here is informed. Informed because that is why we are talking of data, so that we do not just wake up and say, we need to migrate from NHIF to SHA. Eh? So we need something which can convince us beyond reasonable doubt that this is the current situation, yeah, and this is the Canaan, and this is the road to Canaan. So that when we reach Jericho, we don't require a bridge again. Sorry. So now having understood what is epidemiology and epidemiological data, now we ask ourselves, what is out there with regard to epidemiology versus policy? I read a paper which was speaking to this subject, and they said, they compared various case studies, and they said, all those case studies have actually proven beyond reasonable doubt that epidemiological evidence impacts policy to address emerging public health problems. So the discussion is not whether epidemiological data does have an implication in policy. The question is, why are we not doing it? And how can we start doing it? Because studies have been done enough to show that epidemiological data is inevitably important when we are making our policies. And when we are making decisions, so that then we make the right decisions. Few epidemiologists are formally trained in domains to support policy development. How many MPs are epidemiologists today? Do we have? So if our epidemiologists are aloof about policy issues, calling them politics, most people call things to do with policies and what have you, they call them politics. And then they call the positive predictive value, they call it science. Okay? So if we distance ourselves like that, and probably say the other world is politics, and in the parliament then there is going to be a huge disconnect. Okay? And that is why we are saying the challenge has been thrown to us for us to be getting interested to understand and get training in the domains of policy development. Because we are holding a lot of powerful tool, which is the data. Most of you here have done masters. Studio. Even if you have not done masters, you have done a project somewhere which has data and come up with the findings. Studio. And I am sure those findings did not make it beyond your computer or beyond the journal that published them. And now, when scholars are taught to start up, we all start up, still. But we have not contributed to changing the narrative in the areas even where we studied, because we identify gaps and stop at that. So we want to challenge us to not stop at that, but take it to the next level of attempting to make it a decision or a policy decision. If you are sure our study can actually start, I mean, it's above board in terms of design and all those other checks of quality. So I want to introduce you to some types of policy, because not all policies are the same type. We say there are public policies which are created by governments to address societal issues. For instance, if you develop a health policy, environmental policy, we have veterinary policy, we have livestock policy, do you have geologies? Do you have GIS? That is the environment, eh? Good. So all those policies that are developed to address those societal issues are called public policies. Then we have these organizational ones. In organizations that we are in, we have policies that guides the organizations. You know, those internal things. And this is what we are saying, developed within organizations to govern internal operations. IT usage, how do you behave in case of fire? How do you behave when staff ask you for leave? Do you say, no, yes? You have to be guided by a certain policy so that it helps you to be impartial. Then sector-specific policies focused on specific fields like livestock development, disease control, public health, AMR, and so on and so forth, specific on that issue. And then you need to then, as we speak about this, you need to be asking yourself, in your respective sectors that you're helping to do whatever you're doing today, are you able to identify some of these policies that are there? I'm trying to check time so that I remain like a miniskirt all through the process. Great. So I want to take you very fast through examples of these policy instruments per area. I told you there are some things which are called legislation. So how many broad categories of these policies do you know, apart from public and then organizational and these ones? Which other ones do you know? You can see one already here is legislation, which entails acts of parliament and such laws. Which others do you know? Or can you remember any other category, broad category? Kuna acts of parliament. Ukiingia hapo Kenya law, there is a whole database for acts of parliament. There is even a witchcraft act. Yeah? It's a serious witchcraft act. Yeah? There are others which are half page, others are very many pages. So do you have any other type of legislation, types of policies or policy instruments that you can think of? Mimi najua ni jam mko nayo because I can see you know what we are asking. But please Please persevere for the next few minutes. Then we tuichape ilale. So give me one example, one more example. Yes. Great. The county laws, right? Yeah, those are also a category on their own, okay? Yeah, but remember there is an act of parliament that stipulates this is what the county will do, this is what the national government will do, and it is still legislations, you know? Yeah, that is one, yes? Yes? There is treaties, which is very important, yeah? Regulations, good. There are guidelines, and when you have guidelines, you also talk of even SOPs and what have you. Yeah? All those are policies. Remember President akisimama hapa, and then they say, from tomorrow, blah, blah, blah will happen. Do you know that is a policy? That is a policy, unfortunately. So, examples. So I want to take you through some of them, which are very key categories. The laws and acts that we have, I just gave you a few examples here. Like you have Public Health Act, we have Animal Diseases Act, we have Environmental Management Act. You have many other acts that you know that are governing public health arena. Sidio? Just mention one. Even the Meat Control Act. Data Protection Act. Yeah. Pharmacy and Poisons Board Act. Yes. Sorry? Food, Drugs, and Chemical Substances Act. So there are very many. In livestock alone, I think we have more than 100. Yeah? So I think that's just to mention but a few, to let you know that these are what, when you hear there is a bill in Parliament, it's heading to becoming an act of Parliament. And that is the process. And then somebody mentioned regulations. Regulations, when you read an act of Parliament, uko ndani imesema, the minister shall establish regulations to govern the regulation of veterinary drugs or something like that. That innocent clause makes another regulation like Veterinary Medicine Directorate Council regulation. And it creates a parastatal, just like that. So, regulation, okay? So, regulations are anchored on acts. And they just give clarity where the act cannot, because the act cannot stipulate everything. But when you talk about Animal Diseases Act, it cannot now tell you how to regulate livestock movement. But now you have a whole regulation which is talking about that. Okay? Tell me any other regulation you know of, either being processed or already done in this space. Oh my God. Shall go kill us now. Okay. There is a share regulation. Which is the other regulation? Any other that you know of? Great. Like those of us in livestock, they know there is already a regulation which is supposed to govern livestock identification and traceability. Yeah? In Kenya, so that we can identify all the animals. But I doubt during this season whether they can even see the light of the day, because everything will be looked at from a tax angle. So the other thing is, the other policy instrument is like sessional papers. Sessional papers are the things that are now called policies. They normally call the session paper number 2 of this. Like, for example, here we have sessional paper number 2 of 2021. It's called Kenya Health Policy. Then we have sessional paper number 3 of 2009. National Land Policy. Sessional paper number 2 of 2008, National Livestock Policy. Then sessional paper number 2 of 2020, Veterinary Policy. So they all govern different areas. They provide problem statements, and they also provide policy direction for each problem. And it becomes the basis then for us to require various acts of parliament. Remember, which is the overarching law in Kenya? The Constitution. Then we come to another thing which we call strategy. Which is the biggest strategy in Kenya? Vision 2030. It gives the key things you're supposed to do in the health sector, and from those key things you develop policies or sessional papers, and from those sessional papers you're supposed to develop acts of parliament that are supposed to guide that, and from those acts of parliament you're supposed to develop regulations under those, and where regulations have not addressed, you go down and continue developing guidelines and SOPs, and continue like that until you're happy. Yeah? Because your happiness is key for us in policy. Yeah? In the spirit of what? Yeah? It's the spirit of Shah. So this is just some examples of strategies that we have. Remember, we have National Action Plan for things like AMR. This is a strategy. Rabies elimination strategy, or to just summarize, all the disease-specific strategies fall under that category of policies. And we also have other things like contingency plans, which are supposed to guide that. Then we have things, the president's pronouncements, which are actually documented in executive orders. Yeah? Executive order, I want to give you an example of this executive order. This executive order number 14, which was actually gazetted on 21st January 2022, as innocent as it looks, it created an institution. Who knows that institution? National Public Health Institute. As innocent as that paragraph looks, it created the National Public Health Institute. So the executive orders are also very powerful, and they stipulate the mandates of various departments in government and creates others and creates parastatals so that they guide the functioning of the government. Then a few case studies where data has been used so that then we actually appreciate that this can be done. When there was COVID-19, there was data on the cases where they were happening, where they started, how they progressed. And that is where we started saying, you just need some 8 hours or 13 hours to get an infection from here to US. See, yeah, so it is that close to you. And that is why we are saying we understood the dynamics by doing things we were calling contact tracing and so on and so forth. And that is what informed the lockdowns you saw. For those of us who are not very young, lockdowns and the vaccination strategies you saw. Is there anybody who was not affected by the lockdown here? They must have accompanied their parents for this meeting. RVF in Kenya, the other case study is the RVF in Kenya. Climatic data, because it has been studied in studies and they have established, for RVF to occur in Kenya, we need flooding. So that then the mosquito can thrive. So wherever we see alerts for floods, it should be an alert for Rift Valley fever. And this informed the vaccination programs. And in the livestock sector, we also know there is data that tells us pastoralists during this season move from this point and they use this migratory route, pass through this watering point, migrate south, and they come and settle in Isiolo. Some who are not satisfied in Isiolo progress, and you find them in Nyeri, in the ranches in Nyeri. Some of them will proceed and make it to Dagoretti Rota for sale. So that migratory pattern, if you are concerned about a disease that is affecting animals in the origin, and then subsequently affecting human beings, and therefore a public health concern, then you must be concerned about data which is telling you which time do these animals move from here to the other part. Does that make sense? Great. So then epidemiological data from outbreaks also informed regional livestock movement controls and vaccination efforts. Then data linked air pollution to respiratory diseases, informing policies discussion in urban planning and vehicle emission standards. These are just examples of how we have done that. The sugar tax. There was a policy on sugar tax in South Africa that was based on obesity cases and diabetes data. People realize that there is a lot of obesity which is being linked to sugar, and therefore to address it directly and also address the issues of taxation, they taxed the sugar. Okay? Then AMR data led to creation of, not AMR data, sorry. This is a study, AMR data, in a study that was done in 2009, is the one that led to establishment of that innocent clause I was telling you about in one of the acts called Veterinary Surgeons and Veterinary Professionals Act, which give birth to a whole council, Veterinary Medicine Council, okay? Which is now equivalent to Pharmacy and Poison Board in veterinary medicine issues. Then antimicrobial resistance, again, surveillance that was undertaken in hospitals, veterinary labs, environment, revealed AMR patterns, and this led to the development of National Action Plan for AMR, okay, to promote the prudent use of antimicrobials. Then again, epidemiological data proved a challenge in brucellosis diagnostics, and recently we were called somewhere to have a conversation about harmonizing the testing for brucellosis, because so many people are positive, and if you actually subject them to a second test, you will almost be shocked, because probably half of them will not repeat the same, will actually not confirm the first test. So there was a lot of variability and misdiagnosis, and subsequently subjecting patients to unnecessary treatment. So I think it's important then to understand these patterns. So that then we can be able to shape the conversation. So there is already a policy brief in that regard in place. So how do we do as professionals to be able to make this, to use this data? First and foremost, we need to strengthen our surveillance systems, regardless of which sector you are, be it animal, be it environment, be it food safety area. We need to strengthen our surveillance system and collect credible data. Then we up our game in terms of capacity in data analysis and interpretation, so that we understand the disease trends or events trends and hotspots, and also risk factors that are driving them. Then in a consultative manner with the stakeholders, prioritize public health issues. We have to prioritize because there are 1,001 issues. So we have to ask ourselves which is the priority issue. And then after the stakeholder engagement, we need during that to tell our story using evidence, which is better. And then build consensus with the stakeholders on our priorities and the interventions that we are providing. From there, formulated into a policy. And this lady called Faith et al. Actually tried to illustrate that in that illustration in their paper, which they published in 2016. So it's just enumerating that similar approach. And for policy, just like any other policy, we start by identifying our problem. And this is what we have said, we are going to use our data. And of course, consultation. We set our agenda, and then we design our policy, and then we take it to the other processes which is cabinet, and then from there parliament. Then once it gets approval from parliament, it's taken for assenting by the president, subsequently publication to becoming enacted. The policy briefs and the CAB memo, just to give you an example of them. If you have done a study that you think has got very far-reaching consequences or has some life-changing recommendations, it is important to escalate them to the next level of becoming policy. And the quickest way to do that, if there is already a legal framework for that, we can actually develop policy briefs. And there is a structure of the policy briefs where we give the problem as it is, and we also give what are the possible problems, what are the possible interventions, try to cost, and also give alternatives of if this is done, this is what is going to happen. If it's not done, this is what we are likely to lose, and so on and so forth. And summarize that into a one-page policy brief, and that can be able to change and convince the policymakers. If you are very close or convinced that you have the goodwill of the cabinet or the minister in line with the decision you are making, if you make your case using the data and empirical evidence, I'm sure you can be able to convince them and develop a cabinet memo. Our work is normally to develop cabinet memos for ministers in the sector, and we base it on evidence. So the more evidence we generate as scientists, the easier our work becomes, because mine is just to put 3 papers on that subject matter, compile them into a good cabinet memo, and give it to the cabinet secretary. If he buys that idea, he tables it into the cabinet, and if it is adopted, that's a government decision. Very high level. Sidio? Kwa hayo mengi machache, naomba kufika tamati. Is there any quick question we can take? Because of course I know everybody is looking forward for the next session, which is very interesting. And I doubt it's in this room. Any question? Yes. Great. That's a great question. Whether there is a procedure after you have realized your findings on how to escalate this. I know most of you, when they are doing studies, they normally do the studies together with the line departments, ministry, or sections. And this is where it starts. Because if everybody is convinced that these are good findings, then this is where we can start originating, and that's why I said that's why I actually deliberately brought the 2 tools, the policy brief and the cabinet memo. It's very hard to go and talk to these guys with a scientific paper, but if you package it into a policy brief, it will be speaking to, for instance, in this government, it will be speaking directly to the beta agenda, and it will be packaged in a language that is appropriate for policymakers to adopt. And once you manage to convince everybody using a policy brief, you can escalate it to a cabinet memo. So the answer is yes. There was one there, and then that one. Then we can, yeah, you can start with that.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. My question is, you talked about the need for integrated data sharing systems among the 3 sectors. So how are we able to balance that vis-a-vis the, for example, the Data Protection Act that protects data from the different sectors? So how do we balance between the need to protect data and the need to ensure that the frameworks are integrated? Thank you.
Very pertinent question, because most people are generating information and everybody considers their information very sensitive. Of course, for me, in my other life, where I was actually in charge of livestock data, of course I was convinced this is very sensitive data, because if I mishandle it, it can even close trade for our livestock farmers. So I could not be reckless to just share. But most important is people understanding common goals and objectives and agreeing to what extent of information is helpful and helpful for what. Because it's not just a matter of sharing data. Like now, you have no business bogging down the animal health sector with the data on malaria. You have no business bogging them data with, down with the data on polio. But issues that are common interest like zoonotic diseases or public health events, information, I think it's just important that the conversation about common interest and goals and responsibility of each, including signing data sharing agreements and coming up with a community of practice like Strathmore is trying to do in agriculture sector, that then can start the conversation. And thank you for asking the question in my pet subject. Yeah.
I'm also coming from that point of so many people are doing potentially similar things, but probably in different setups. So a good example is how we are seated here from different institutions, and you may find that at some point we have done, for example, studies focusing on adolescents or similar things. So each one of us wants to convince policymakers that our findings are strong enough to inform policy. So I'm putting myself on the shoe of the policymaker. Everyone wants to make noise about their findings and how relevant to policy they are. So my question is, must all epidemiological research studies end up in policy?
The answer is actually no. Because if you looked at the process that we enumerated here, one of the key things we insisted on, at the stage after you have come up with your evidence, you're going to talk to the stakeholders who are actually multisectoral, so that then you can actually speak with data and prioritize the issues. I'm imagining the public health sector issues, and if we are all stakeholders in public health sector, we will definitely come to with a list. Remember, there was a prioritization of zoonotic diseases in Kenya. Regardless of how passionate your disease is, even if it ranks down there, that is the position it takes. And it is the position it is even in that publication that is still there today. So I think it's a compromise and building consensus using stakeholders, but most importantly, using empirical evidence.
Then just related to that, could we be missing something? Because a good example I would like to use is something like digital health. We have done several, like different people have done different studies and made policy recommendations, others have been coming up with guidelines. But if you do a close check, you realize that some things that were tested, piloted in as back as 2015, others still pilot them and make policy recommendations about them. And so it's unclear to tell where we are in terms of this research informing policy. Could we be missing a link in terms of how far do we go?
Yeah, so in the interest of time, I do agree there is some de-link, but of course, like now in livestock sector, there has not been a bench conversation about being able to transit research into that. But I know right now the Directorate of Policy, Research and Regulation is having a deliberate division which is looking into that. So that even at the point of setting the research agenda, we have stakeholders agreeing this is our priority area. So that not every other study necessarily warrants the attention of the government. The government sets the agenda based on their priorities. Because for sure, like now the government has priority value chain. In health sector, they have a priority area, and so on and so forth. And I think if we started from far there, the decisions are going to be easy to cascade up there, as opposed to where everybody is doing their thing. Thank you very much, and we can always keep the conversation going. Thank you.